Every operating system has a number, a minimum amount of RAM it needs just to turn on. That number tells you exactly what the developers prioritized, who they built it for, and how seriously they took efficiency. We're going from the absolute lowest to the highest, and by the end, you'll know exactly where your operating system stands. 8 megabytes. KolibriOS. This is the floor, the absolute minimum RAM any graphical operating system needs to function today. KolibriOS fits its entire system, desktop, browser, text editor, and games, onto a 1.44 megabyte floppy disk. The whole thing is written in x86 assembly language, which is why it boots in under 5 seconds and runs on hardware from the 1990s. It idles at 8 megabytes of RAM and never needs more. Nothing else comes close to this number. 28 megabytes. MicroCore. MicroCore is the text-only base edition of TinyCore Linux. No graphical interface, just a command line. It loads entirely into RAM at boot, which means once it starts, you can remove the USB drive and the system keeps running from memory alone. At 28 megabytes, it is the lightest Linux system with a real package manager and network stack ever built. 46 megabytes. TinyCore Linux. The graphical version of TinyCore adds a minimal desktop on top of MicroCore for just 18 extra megabytes. It was built by Robert Shingledecker, the original developer of Damn Small Linux. The entire philosophy is modularity. You start with almost nothing and add only what you need. No bloat, no background services, no assumptions about what you want installed. 64 megabytes. Puppy Linux is a family of ultra-lightweight distributions, not a single OS, and its lightest variants run on 64 megabytes of RAM. Like TinyCore, it loads entirely into memory at boot. Every application opens almost instantly because nothing is being read from a slow drive during use. Puppy has been used for decades as a rescue system. When a Windows machine breaks badly enough to not boot, a Puppy Linux USB is how technicians get inside and recover the data. 128 megabytes. DSL and Alpine Linux. Damn Small Linux. DSL was for years the go-to choice for machines from the early 2000s, fitting a full graphical system into just 50 megabytes of storage and 128 megabytes of RAM. The project was retired and then revived by the community in 2022 with updated packages. Alpine Linux also operates comfortably at 128 megabytes, but its purpose is completely different. Alpine was built for servers and containers, not desktops. It became the standard base image for Docker containers worldwide because its entire base install idles at under 50 megabytes of actual RAM usage, leaving almost everything free for the application running on top of it. 256 megabytes. SliTaz AntiX. SliTaz is a French Linux distribution that fits a complete graphical desktop into 256 megabytes of RAM and just 80 megabytes of disk space. It runs entirely from RAM, boots in seconds, and is still actively maintained. AntiX is built specifically to run on older 32-bit machines that newer distributions have abandoned. It avoids system entirely, uses lightweight window managers instead of full desktop environments, and remains one of the few modern Linux distributions that officially supports hardware from the early 2000s. 512 megabytes. Debian and Linux Mint XFCE. Debian requires 512 megabytes for its base installation. First released in 1993, Debian is the foundation that Ubuntu, Linux Mint, Kali Linux, Raspberry Pi OS, and dozens of other distributions are built on top of. It powers more web servers globally than almost any other Linux distribution, and it is famous for releasing updates slowly and deliberately, testing packages for months before they reach users. Stability over speed, always. Linux Mint XFCE sits at the same 512 megabyte minimum. Linux Mint is the most downloaded Linux desktop distribution on DistroWatch, and its XFCE edition delivers a complete, familiar desktop, taskbar, start menu, system tray, at a fraction of the memory cost of its heavier counterparts. 1 gigabyte. Lubuntu, Manjaro XFCE, and Arch Linux. Lubuntu is Ubuntu's official lightweight edition. It uses the LXQT desktop environment and accesses the same 50,000 packages available to standard Ubuntu, but at a fraction of the memory cost. Manjaro XFCE officially lists 1 gigabyte as its minimum, making it the lightest entry point into Arch-based Linux, a rolling release system where updates arrive continuously rather than in version jumps. Arch Linux itself requires 512 megabytes for a base install, but is listed here because its real-world minimum for meaningful use sits at 1 gigabyte. Arch has no graphical installer. You build everything manually from the command line, which makes it the most technically demanding mainstream Linux distribution to set up and the most customizable once running. 2 gigabytes. Fedora, Kali Linux, and Manjaro GNOME. Fedora requires 2 gigabytes and ships the absolute latest Linux kernel, making it the fastest distribution for new hardware support. It is maintained by Red Hat and serves as the testing ground for technology that eventually becomes RHEL, Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Kali Linux also requires 2 gigabytes for its full XFCE desktop with its default toolset. Kali comes pre-installed with over 600 security tools. Metasploit, Burp Suite, Wireshark, Nmap, and is maintained by Offensive Security, the organization behind the OSCP certification. It runs on PCs, Raspberry Pi, and Android devices through its NetHunter platform. Manjaro's GNOME edition sits at 2 gigabytes minimum, where the heavier GNOME desktop environment pushes memory requirements up from its XFCE sibling, 4 gigabytes. Windows 11, RHEL, Ubuntu 24.04, and Fedora Workstation. Windows 11 officially requires 4 gigabytes. In practice, it consumes most of that at idle, and Microsoft publicly acknowledged in 2026 that Windows 11 performs poorly on 8 gigabyte machines. RHEL, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, also requires 4 gigabytes for its server edition. RHEL is not free for most users and requires a paid subscription, but it provides up to 10 years of security updates per release. IBM acquired Red Hat in 2019 for $34 billion. Ubuntu 24.04 LTS recommends 4 gigabytes and remains fully supported until 2029. 8 gigabytes. macOS. macOS requires 8 gigabytes minimum. Apple designs both the operating system and every Mac it runs on, which allows macOS to use memory far more efficiently than Windows on generic hardware. Apple's unified memory architecture puts the CPU, GPU, and RAM in the same physical pool. Apple defended 8 gigabyte MacBooks as recently as 2023, claiming they perform comparably to 16 gigabyte Windows machines. By 2024, Apple shifted its entire Mac lineup to 16 gigabytes as its baseline, driven by AI features that need significantly more headroom. 16 gigabytes. Windows Copilot Plus PCs and Mac OS with Apple Intelligence. Microsoft's Copilot Plus PC certification requires 16 gigabytes minimum. Apple Intelligence. Apple's on-device AI system requires a device with at least 8 gigabytes, but performs significantly better at 16. Local AI models, the ones that run directly on your machine without sending your data to a server, typically need between 8 and 16 gigabytes just for the model itself before the operating system's own requirements are added. The reason RAM requirements jumped so dramatically across every major operating system between 2022 and 2026 is not more features, better graphics, or larger apps. It is AI running locally, and that number is still going up.